Before I start, I would like to make a quick note on our list of authors with the contribution of Haris Kranis and Manolis Kourtos from the University of Athens, who joined our team in 2020. This talk is on the preliminary results of a geoarchaeological study we did at the plain of Ierapetra, focused on Minoan habitation. This is conducted by the Wiener Laboratory for Archaeological Science of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, with the collaboration for East Crete, the University of Athens, and the Euphoria of Lasithi. Our area, the study area is Ierapetra, which can be described as an area been until recently neglected in terms of its archaeology and geomorphology, as it has been already discussed by the previous talk of Eleni Nodaru. Ierapetra plain is the largest, most fertile plain of Crete. Therefore, one would expect that this would be the focus of intensive habitation, as the case in other parts of the island, at the with the Ierapetra and Festos, Galatas at the plain of Iraklio, us at the plain of, and of course, Knossos, Archanes, Maya, Palekastro, Zakros. At the same time, at the neighboring smaller plains close to Ierapetra, there are large towns or palatial elite buildings at Myrtos, Pyrgos, Gournia, and Makrios, and therefore one would expect that these complex forms of habitation and economic and social structure would not at the plain of Ierapetra. It is therefore somewhat puzzling that we haven't yet found any traces or surface finds and architectural finds, the existence of a central Minoan city. However, recently we have some indirect but strong evidence for the existence of a central Minoan urban city. These come from the sites of Gaidrofas, Stavromenos, and Chrysi. Specifically, at the excavations conducted by Yiannis Papadatos and Chrysa have brought light neopalatial village, which is interpreted as an administrative phenomenon, exploiting them and distributing them at the plain of Ierapetra. At the same region, a surface survey conducted by Tina Kaladzopoulou has revealed the existence of smaller sites that are thought to work as peripheral to Gaidrofas, probably as residences to those working on the exploitation of the natural mountainous resources. At a close distance to Gaidrofas, the peak sanctuary of Stavromenos, excavated by Yiannis Papadatos and Chrysa SOFIANOU, produced large quantities of pottery and figurines as offerings from the worshippers coming from the broader region of Ierapetra. And last but not least, the recent excavations by the Euphoria of Lasithi, with the support of the Instab Study Center, have brought to light a specialized settlement focusing on the exploitation of marine resources as murex shells for the production of purple dye. And this settlement is thought to control the trade networks of the south coast of the island. All these settlements cannot be interpreted independently and are thought to function as a network of settlements, having as a reference a central Minoan center site. Therefore, we formed this project to test this hypothesis of the presence of a central Minoan city or to suggest possible areas where this could have been located. In the case that this site would be found at the plain of Ierapetra, it is reasonable that this would be covered by thick alluvial deposits. At the same time, the visibility of such an area would be distorted by the recent greenhouse constructions, which are very dense on the plain. And for the construction of which massive earth-moving works have taken place, transporting sediment and soils from different parts of the area, and in this way distorting the possible archaeological remains. Therefore, our aim was to reconstruct the configuration of the plain, understand the natural processes of its formation, and in this way we wanted to interpret the Minoan habitation patterns and explain the visibility of the archaeological remains as we see today. Some background information. This map, you have already seen it at the previous presentation of Eleni Nodaro. We have the plain of Ierapetra being filled by Pleistocene mass and conglomerates. We also have prominent features that are Pleistocene marine terraces that you can see even at the northern part of the area, showing that there is a general instability at this region, and of course alluvial deposits at the plain with screes and cones developed along the eastern border of the site, along the whole length of the Ierapetra normal fault. Which takes us to another important factor for the region, that is tectonic activity. Ierapetra normal fault is a major tectonic line for Crete. It has an orientation from north-northeast to south-southwest. And its exact location at the southern part of the area, which includes the plain of Ierapetra, has not been accurately located. If we go at the coast of Ierapetra, close to the city, we can see that there are still there are bit rock formations that are uplifted 1 to 2 meters, indicating that this instability is still recent and active. In this same framework, the major streams of the plain, Kedrianos to the west and Kotavianou. Kotavianou in particular, we can see that its development is mainly indicated to the west, suggesting that the continuous activity and the reactivation of the Ierapetra fault, which has prevented it from developing to the east. Turning to the methodology of this project, we conducted a preliminary geomorphological assessment and mapping of the study area, which was followed by underground testing. The underground testing was, in a first stage, conducted with the use of a vibrocorer. We used a 2 centimeter open gouge, which gave us the possibility to study the stratigraphy on the site and assess our strategy according to the results. This course reached 2 to 5 meters depth. And in the second stage, we decided to open wider trenches with the use of a backhoe in order to have a wider view of the stratigraphic sequence. We opened 28 trenches, which reached a depth of 3 to 4 meters. We were also lucky to have in our disposal 2 very wide trenches that were already opened for the use of water tank construction. And by the owners of the greenhouses. So before these would be filled with water, we were able to climb down and study the stratigraphy in a much wider extent. We also conducted a small-scale laboratory analysis, including micromorphological sampling, and we also took some OSO samples for representative parts of the stratigraphic sequence, and this laboratory analysis is still ongoing. The units that we identified were plotted in cross sections, and these were correlated with pottery concentrations that we would find along the stratigraphy. Some of the pottery could be recognized and dated, and therefore we correlated these concentrations with the individual sedimentary units. And then we extrapolated our results from the sedimentary sequence to a digital elevation model and their derivatives in order to reconstruct the configuration of the wetland. During our reconnaissance visit to the site, at the western part, the north of the plain of the city of Ierapetra, we identified a gently sloping plateau on which we could recognize a weak palisol formation lying on the Pliocene marls, probably of a pre-Minoan date, and this was covered by colluvium deposits of a few tens of centimeters thickness. These palisol formation, as you can see, parts of it on the aerial photo are frequently exposed as the colluvium is very thin. Therefore, we suggested that archaeological remains that would be found at this part of the study area would be very close to the surface or lying on it. Therefore, this part of the study area was excluded from further research, and we focused our study at the eastern part of the study area, where the action of Kedrianos and Kotavianou have created a complex drainage system. Moreover, the surface survey that is conducted at the same region by the Euphoria of Lasithi with collaboration of the University of Athens and the Instab Study Center has indicated that at this part, indicated here with the red border, there weren't so many surface finds, while these were concentrated, as you see here, the concentrations with yellow, at the region surrounding this part of the study area. Another important point that was taken into account, a very important find, during the first stage of our research, a small-scale excavation was conducted at the south coast, at the east of the city of Ierapetra, and at the depth of 3 meters, Minoan pottery concentration was located lying on top of reduced glade sediments, which were interpreted as sediments related to a wetland. Therefore, one of our main questions was to reconstruct the extent of this wetland formation and interpret how this could be related to the Minoan habitation patterns. There is evidence that part of the plain has been wet until recently, the middle of the last century, from observations of old aerial photos. As you can see at this old aerial picture, there is intensive cultivation surrounding this central part of the plain, which is most likely not very heavily cultivated, while at the same time we have local farmers narrating that the animals' feet would sink in parts of the plain, suggesting that this part would be at least periodically wet. Another important find was the mapping of 3 generations of alluvial fans developing at the eastern border of the plain. And one of the questions was to reconstruct how the evolution of these alluvial fans have influenced or how it is related to the formation of the wetland. So taking all these into account, we made this a reconstruction suggesting that the wetland was extending to the north to an area close to 2 kilometers. This wetland included glade waterlogged deposits that signify a low energy high water table, while there are a few oxidation routes showing that there is seasonal periods of drying out. There are parts at the west and northeast where sediments are greenish gray and more oxidized, suggesting that this part is related to the periphery of the wetland. While at the east, a system of 2 generations of alluvial fans has been recorded, showing that these already existed that predate the formation of the wetland. You can also see that the periphery of the wetland to the east is more gradual to the one to the west, which is more abruptly related to the malformation. The Minoan pottery at this stage is very little, and it is mainly concentrated at the upper part of the formation. In a later stage, we see that the water table becomes shallower, the sediments are more oxidized, there are intercalations of coarser material, sands, and the sediments are also become also reddish with dense redoxymorphic features. It can be described as a stage of high alluvial input with highly fluctuating water table and periodical subaerial exposure. This stage of the wetland is related to the formation of the 3rd generation of alluvial fans to the east. And at this stage, the majority of the Minoan pottery is recorded to a more or less consistent depth of 2.5 meters until more than 3 meters. In certain cases, we could relate a stratigraphic sequence from Neo-Palaeolithic to pre-Palaeolithic period. There are interesting concentrations at the north of the wetland where there are rich pottery concentrations related to stones, and this gave us the indication that there is probably a Minoan habitation center nearby. While another important find is located at the southeast, where a concentration of pottery is also related to some architectural features. However, this part of the study area needs further research in order to investigate the character of this find. You can see here how macroscopically these characteristics of this stage look, with the strong redoxymorphic features, some coarser sediments within these glade wetland deposits. At the third stage, the plain turns towards a more, the wetland turns more to a terrestrialized stage. We have calcite formations at the northwest, while on the alluvial alluvial fan, there is indications of soil formation as the sediments show blocky structure. The wetland gradually becomes an alluvial plain, while there are still patches of wetland, particularly at the southern part of the plain. At this stage, we don't have pottery concentrations. This is a sedimentary unit of less than a meter, while we have pottery found on top of this formation. And you can see here how macroscopically these calcitic infillings within the soil sediments look. To give an indication of how these stages look on the stratigraphic sequence and summarize the results, we see these fine-grained clay deposits at the bottom with the presence of the oxidized roots. At the later stage, the sediments become coarser. You can see them even here. And at this part, we see the redoxymorphic features in the coarser sediment matrix. And at the third stage, the sediments become again more fine-grained, redox, and rich in calcareous inclusions. In a further stage of this research, which will complete the OSL analysis, the micromorphological analysis, and will be complemented by a paleoenvironmental study, including palynological analysis, we aim to correlate all these events with regional, climatic, anthropogenic, or tectonic events, as this has been attested in other parts of the island with flash floods events which have been recently chronologically attested and related to climatic aridity events or tentatively anthropogenic changes in the land use practices or abandonment of the sites, but also tectonic events. Tectonic activity is suggested to be very dense and frequent in the area. There is a number of earthquakes being recorded since antiquity until present, and this seems to have played a crucial role in the formation of the plain and the visibility of archaeological remains. More specifically, we have an indication of an abrupt drop of the elevation at the this part of the 19 meters above sea level, which creates a pronounced neutral point. And at this same location, the tributary of SOFIANOU makes an abrupt horizontal bend. You can see it here in this exaggerated elevation model, which is tentatively related and interpreted with the presence of a horizontal fault at this part of the study area. Conclude what we have found with this project. It's not only the geomorphological evidence, but there are clear suggestions of where a Minoan center could be or could not be located. Of course, this hypothesis is still ongoing. It is highly possible, but it is still a work in progress. We know now that there cannot be a Minoan settlement found the central part of the plain because this has been covered by an extensive wetland. We know that at the north and northwest part, the sediments are very thin, and any potential archaeological remains would be found close or on the surface and would be already visible. So we make the hypothesis that the north part and the finds at the southwest could be a good candidate for the presence of a Minoan center. However, this research requires more evidence to verify or reject the hypothesis. The presence of a wetland at this part of the plain does not weaken the hypothesis of a presence of Minoan city. It rather reinforces it as if we relate it to other finds in the broader regions of Maya and Festos, which are associated with the presence of wetlands. And we now know that these formations have played a major role in the economic and socio-political development of the broader region. Thank you for your attention.